So, okay. What I want to do is start as we always do. Um, um, I'm still not so good at manipulating Zoom and my new Mac, but let's give this a whirl. Um, let's figure out how to make this bigger. Oops. Give me a second. I apologize. I thought I had this figured out. Um, when I try to share, I want to share this document. Now I can't figure out how to make it bigger. Okay, let's
Pretty
can you
good.
can you see this?
Yes, I
Yes.
can.
Okay, great. Okay. So we're actually almost finished. We're on letter 16 of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And today's letter is Ayin. Okay. Ayin, as I said, is 16th letter of the 22, and its numerical value is 70. Ayin is a silent letter, much like Aleph, which was the very first letter that we talked about. So it has no sound of its own. It sounds like whatever vowel it is paired with. Okay, this is what an ayin looks like in three different fonts. One, two, three, and ayin literally. Somebody, I've got some windy background noise. Um, Martina, are you outside with? No, you're muted.
I'm
Okay.
muted.
All right. Okay. Anyway, ayin, the word ayin in Hebrew literally means an eye. Um, and if you look closely at the way that the letter is constructed, I think it's clearest in this one that there's an opinion that this letter is made up of two other Hebrew letters that we've already studied. One is a vav, which would be sort of this piece right here. And one is a nun, which is sort of this piece. It's kind of on its side, but perhaps you can see that a vav and a nun together, according to this. Now, there's a deeper meaning of that because the nun, that would be this piece of it right here. Oops, this piece right here that represents humility, and the vav represents Torah. Now, Vav has the numerical value of 6. It was a letter that we learned a whole long time ago. And 6 is the number of sections of the Mishnah, of the oral law. And so the teaching from this is that a person has to have humility in order to acquire Torah. Okay. Here's a couple of words that have ayin in them. Ayin, I told you, means I. So the plural of that, because we have, most of us, if we're blessed, we have two einayim, and this is how it's spelled in Hebrew, einayim. The word ad, very, very common word in spoken Hebrew and also in Tanakh. Ayin Dalet, it means until. And Israel's national airline, El Al, this is how it's written, Aleph Lamed, Ayin Lamed. And also this doesn't start with an ayin, but I was looking for another word to give you. This is the word Shema. We have not learned the letter Shin yet, but we've learned Mem and ayin, Shema. And so the ayin is the last letter of the Shema prayer. And as always, I'm reminding you, because I don't know how many of you who have not yet mastered the alphabet are doing this, but that you continue to look at Hebrew texts, continue to try to identify the letters that we are introducing. And after class is over tonight, I will, as always, um, I will send you this so that you can have it. Okay, now Um, I'm going to try to, um, here we go. Okay. Today I want to talk about something that I feel like is going to make some of you a little uncomfortable. Um, so I'm just asking you to stick with me because my intention is certainly not to make you uncomfortable, but I always want to introduce you to Torah on a deeper level. Okay, I want to take you with me the way that I experience, the way that I understand, as much as I can, the way that I experience and I understand Torah. And so I picked a topic that I personally find endlessly fascinating. And for those of you um, that identify very much with the way that you were taught as Christians, this is likely to be a little uncomfortable for you. Today's topic is reincarnation, specifically reincarnation in the Bible. Okay. But before I talk about that, I need to give you some background um, about how is this part of Torah. Okay. So thank you for staying with me. Um, because the traditional Jewish belief is that this part, that God gave the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai. Okay. And Jews believe that that includes, well, traditional Jews believe that that includes the written Torah and the oral Torah. Now, God gave, there were two sets of tablets, which we call in Hebrew luchot. And in the biblical story, the first time that God gives the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai and he comes down, it is the tablets themselves have a level of holiness that we cannot even begin to understand. And that level of holiness is because God himself, however you understand this, crafted these tablets and wrote on them or engraved them with his own hand. I don't exactly know what that means, but it's important that you understand that these were like the most um, magnificent physical objects that existed because God created them and gave how again, this is all a little mystical, so I don't understand all of it, but that God gave this set of tablets to Moses. And this part of the story that if you look in the book of Exodus, in the book of Shemot, chapter 32, I'm looking specifically at verse 19, because Moses comes down from the mountain and here's the verse. As he approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses was angry. He threw down the tablets in his hand, shattering them at the foot of the mountain. I know you know this part of the story. Okay. So, what happened to those magnificent, godly tablets was that they were shattered. Okay. And Moses goes back up the mountain for another 40 days. And when he comes back, he gets a second set. Now, this is the traditional belief. The second set was inferior to the first set, much like the second temple was inferior to the first temple. Okay, the second set of tablets, which again we call in Hebrew luchot, did not contain the extraordinary level of sanctity of the first set that were literally the handiwork of God. And the writing was the writing of God that he somehow engraved in the tablets. It actually speaks about that in Exodus, same chapter, a few verses before, chapter 32, verse 16. Okay, so Moses comes down with a second set of tablets. And what is so fascinating about this is that I am led to believe that these tablets exist, are likely in the bowels of the Vatican, and that someday we may have the opportunity to see them. I don't know if there are any shards left from the original set of luchot, from the original tablets that Moses brought down, but it makes me like so spiritually excited to think that someday these temple uh, the temple vessels that we believe that the Vatican is holding in their vast underground storage system. And if you're interested, by the way, in that topic, let me know because I have a colleague who does research on all that kind of stuff, and he just published a book about it has the word Vatican, and I don't remember. He's a Jewish guy that lives here in Israel. Anyway, the second set of tablets were man-made, okay? And if you look in this continuing story, now I'm in the book of Exodus, chapter 34, verse 1. is that commanded, oops, God commanded Moses to carve out 2 tablets for yourself. Okay. So the letters on the second set of tablets were written, not engraved, like written is how we understand it, written like ink on paper, as opposed to engraved. In fact, because you know this letter, um, you'll understand this a little bit more, that there are some Hebrew letters that have a shape, but they don't have any middle. So, like the samach, which is a circle, which we did, I don't remember when. The shape of a samach, if it's engaged, it doesn't actually, there's nothing like to hold it there. But the first set of tablets were so miraculous that they could still be read, even um, even in the absence of like a normal presentation of letters. Okay, so so the second set of tablets, we understand when Moses comes down, they're deficient. They're deficient because Moses wrote them, God didn't write them. They're deficient because they have the 10 commandments, but they don't have all of the rest of Torah. So what we believe is that the first time that God transmitted the Torah to Moses, before the sin of the golden calf, he gave him everything. He gave him the entire story. That includes the written Torah, which we know as Tanakh, the oral Torah, all of the Kabbalistic mystical aspects of Torah. It was all there. Okay. But we didn't get it. The people didn't get it because that set of tablets was destroyed because of the sin of the golden calf. Are you with me? I want you to understand. Just yes, am I being clear? Okay. Okay. So that's why when okay, if you go to the book of Devarim, to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 9, verse 10. And by the way, I think I've mentioned this to you before, but sometimes in a Christian translation, the chapter and verse are slightly different. So you have to look at an English translation where Moshe is speaking, and he says, Hashem gave me the two. Remember that the whole book of Devarim is like the goodbye speech of Moses. It's like his final recounting. And so there's a number of things that happened in the Moses story that we see sort of a slightly different version of in the book of Devarim. Okay, so he's recounting what happened. God gave me the 2 tablets of stone, um, written by the finger of Hashem, and on them was written all the words with Hashem, which Hashem taught you. Now that is Moses saying that first set was everything that God wanted to give to humanity, everything that God certainly wanted to give to the Israelite nation, all the complexity and levels of Torah. And that's not, in fact, what we got, because those were destroyed. In Devarim, wait, Kathy has a question. Kathy, let me just finish this thought and then I'll get you a question, okay? In the second set, in Devarim, in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 4, the second set is referred specifically to the 10 commandments. That's how we refer to the second set. Okay. Kathy says, I don't understand why I don't understand why the second set of stones is believed to have been written by man. Not man like in general, Moses, under the direction of God. Okay. So it's still holy, it's still divine, it's just missing part of the story. You want to say, are you typing? You want to say something more? Do you want to just open your mic and speak to
Yeah,
me?
I can just hi, thanks for that. So it says here, carve you 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I shall write on the tablets the words which were on the first tablets that you smashed.
Okay,
So
I
then,
have,
so how does that? I don't understand now. So who wrote it
okay,
then? Because God said he would write it. But Moses
right.
had to carve the stone. I get that. So the stone itself was not that precious because Moses had to carve them and carry them up, which he
Okay,
didn't
you
do
could
this.
be right. I might have misspoken that the point I'm trying to make is that the second set of stones was not as holy and wasn't as it didn't include all of the Torah that was on the first set of tablets, but it could be also I have to clarify because I have 2 opinions on this and I'm not sure which is correct. But the point I want you to understand is that in the transmission of the Torah, which we celebrate on Shavuot, which is coming up in a few weeks, um, the humanity was left with only part of the story. Okay, that's the main point that I'm making. Okay, now even in just the part of the story, and this is something where I think Christian teaching and Jewish teaching on the Bible differs, is that there are, even with what we have, which we understand is not complete, there are still many dimensions of the Torah, and each verse can be understood on multiple levels, and each idea exists on multiple levels. So I'll teach you this idea, which is referred to in Torah circles as pardes. Pardes is a Hebrew word that means garden or orchard. Orchard. In fact, if you ever go to Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv and you park, one of the um, one of the parking lots is called Pardes. Like that's the name of the parking lot because, it's Israel and everything's like so biblical here. Okay. Pardes is spelled in Hebrew with 4 Hebrew letters: Pei, Resh, Daled, Samech. Okay. Pardes, that means orchard, but each of the letters stands for a different level of understanding. And Brett, I know that I explained this once before to a group that you brought to Israel, so I hope this will sound familiar to you. But the Pei stands for the Hebrew word pshat. Pshat is the simple, literal, direct meaning of a verse. Okay. So that is one level on which Torah exists, the simple, literal, direct meaning of a verse. The resh stands for the word remez, which in Hebrew means a hint, and that is a symbolic or an allegorical meaning. The Dalid stands for drush or midrash, which is an interpretation of the text. And the samach stands for the word sod, which is, even in modern Hebrew, a sod is a secret. So it's the hidden mystical meaning. Okay. And there can be overlap in these forms. These are different forms of exegesis of um, biblical understanding. So I just, this is a small example of how something in a Torah expression just has deeper levels. I learned this actually, the first two I knew, the third I didn't know until I learned it with one of my teachers this week, and I want to share it with you. So you're familiar, I'm assuming, with the idea of Shemitah. Okay. There are, in Israel, every 7 years, the land, and we just had a Shemitah year not too long. I don't know if it last year or the year before, but fairly recently, that every 7 years, farmers are supposed to leave the land lie fallow. Okay. And there are 7 cycles of 7 years that end in the 50th year, which we call Yovel. And Yovel is when the land returns, it becomes kind of ownerless and it returns to its original owners. Now, in the time that we're living in, where we don't have a temple and we don't know everybody's tribe and so forth, this isn't as significant as it was in the past, but um this is the system. Also, some people say we know what the Shemitah cycle is, but we don't know where we are in the 7 Shemitah cycle, so we don't know what Yovel is. Okay, so we haven't had a Yovel in a very long time. 7 weeks, so that's 7 times 7 is 49, plus the 50th is Yovel. Here's another place a deeper place. 7 weeks, we are currently in the Omer period. The Omer period is the 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuot. Okay. It's 7 weeks of 7 days, which is 49 days. And the 50th day is a holiday of Shavuot, which is where we celebrate the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. Okay. And this is the part that I learned this week, and it gave me it gave me like a lot of spiritual comfort, because I don't know about I'm assuming that a lot of you are very, very connect. I know you are because of the things you write in the group and things you write to me personally, very connected to what's going on. It's an extremely, extremely emotional time, 228 days into this war. And this is what my teacher said. She said that there's a teaching that um, there's 7 worlds, each lasting 7,000 years. Okay, so again, 7 times 7 is 49. And the end of that process is what we understand as the world to come. Now, that means that whatever happens in our lives, let's say, in Israel, in my house, we have this thing that heats the hot water. It's called a Junkers. I don't know if it exists in Europe, or I never heard of this in America, but in America, we have hot water heaters that are like big tanks, and it heats up the water, and that's how you get hot water. In Israel, a lot of people rely on solar heat in a system that is called a dud shemesh. It's a whole thing. But where we live, the sun's not strong enough to give us strong water. I'm going somewhere with this, by the way, to give us like hot water sufficient for our needs. Okay. So we have this sort of gas system called Junkers that may be European, I don't know. And it gives us hot water on demand. So when we moved into this apartment and we renovated, we wanted to replace the Junker system with something new, and I bought one foolishly, secondhand, for very, very cheap, like 1/7 of the price, 1/8 of the price of a new one, and it kept breaking down. Okay, so we had to buy a new one. Why am I telling you all this? This is a problem. It's expensive. Okay, it costs a lot of money to replace it, which we had to do. So we have to have hot water for showers, but um, on a human level, this is like one of those issues in life, one of those problems in life that crops up, and it makes life complicated. But when you think of, and here's where I'm trying to connect this for you, that we are living in the process of seven worlds, each lasting 7,000 years and ending in this glorious period of the world to come, which we don't fully understand because we don't have the entirety of the Torah, then it puts things in some perspective. So it also, for me, it put in perspective this trouble that we're having with the emotions of, God. Um, One day we learn about soldiers that died in battle, and the next day we learn about the president of Iran being, you know, killed in a helicopter accident. Which seems miraculous. So it's like tragedy, miracle, tragedy, miracle. It's just a very emotional time. But one of the things that I'm going to get off this point in just a second, but one of the things that gives me a tremendous amount of comfort, and that I hope will give you a tremendous amount of comfort, is that we are living like on a tiny, tiny stage of what is really a much bigger picture of the way that God runs his world. And I know that many Christians have been taught, and I would say mistaught, that the oral Torah and Kabbalah are satanic, demonic, or at a minimum, like the words of men and not the words of God, not divine, and they are scornful. Okay. We've spoken about this a little bit before, and that the Jewish perspective is the understanding of Torah in its entirety, not just the um, not just the Bible, is essential to understanding God's Torah. Okay. So I found some statements I wanted to read to you about the idea of learning these aspects of Torah as they come to you. Um, because even my teacher can't can't learn this material undigested. Like, we need filters. So what I can give over to you is a fraction of what she understands, which is a fraction of what it actually is. But just listen to this. Okay. I did the first comment is from the Vilna Gaon, who lived in the 18th century. He was a huge authority on the Bible. He was a biblical scholar. He was a Talmudic expert, and he was also a Kabbalist, meaning that he studied the mystical tradition. And this is what he said. It relates to Geula. He said, the final redemption will only come through the learning of the Torah, but the most critical part of that final redemption will be specifically dependent on learning the Panemius HaTorah. Panemius HaTorah means the inside, like the hidden parts of Torah. And that's where the concept, I am going to talk about reincarnation. And that's where that part of that part of Torah teaching lives. Okay. The Gra also said, the Vilna Gaon also said, a person doesn't understand Sod, meaning the mystical part, even the simple understanding. If a person, Let me re-say that. A person that doesn't understand Sod, a person that can't accept the the deeper meanings of Torah, he says that even the simple meanings of the Torah will elude him. In other words, he's saying it's a package. And if you really want to understand Torah, then you have to accept that it's deeper than just the Bible. It's more than just the Bible. And I know that this is uncomfortable for people who were trained as Christians. So I'm, as always, I'm trying to give you like um, the most authentic expression and tell you how Jews understand this. Listen to this. The Shlach HaKodesh, which the Shlach HaKodesh was also 17th century. He moved to Israel in 1621, and he's buried in Tiberia. Okay, and he said the later generations living in the time of Chevlei Mashiach, these are the birth pangs of Mashiach, which we believe is in our generation, have permission to learn the Nistar more than previous generations. What is the Nistar? It's the same thing. It's the mystical side, it's the hidden side, it's the deeper side, whatever we have. And we know we don't have the full transmission. One more, the Baal HaTanya, who was another great rabbi in the 18th century, who was basically the first rabbi of Chabad. He said, he's quoting the Arizal, who says specifically during the later generations of Chevlei Mashiach, again, that is again our time period. It's not only permissible, but a mitzvah to reveal this wisdom. Okay, so that's all background for why I feel comfortable to share this with you. I'm trying to just resize my screen here. To share with you these ideas, because I want to give you this concept in Hebrew, which is endlessly fascinating to me. In Hebrew, we call it Gilgulim. Grammatically, Gilgulim is related to the Hebrew word ma'agal, which is a circle. And it's one way that we refer in Hebrew to reincarnation. Okay. Um, so Gilgulim, by the way, this is the book. If you're at all interested in this story, it's not a big book. It's called Return Again, The Dynamics of Reincarnation by Rabbi Avram Aryeh Trugman. Some of you may be familiar with him because he does a fair amount of teaching to non-Jews. But this is a very Jewish book, but he speaks about Gilgulim is the recurring cycle of life and death and the process of growth and rebirth of the soul. Okay. So there's an idea that the soul transcends this body, it transcends this lifetime. It existed before my soul, your soul, before you were in this set of circumstances, in this time in history, in this country, in this wherever you live, that your soul existed before and will continue to exist after death. That's a basic idea. Now, he says that there aren't no explicit references to reincarnation in the written Torah. Okay, so you're not going to look in the Bible and have a verse that says, in the simple meaning, reincarnation is a thing. He says, but on the other hand, there are many clear teachings on this subject in the works of Kabbalah and Chassidut. Okay, so that Kabbalah and Chassidut fall in the level of two. Let me just remind you, what was part of the first transmission that we missed? Okay, that God originally wanted to give to humanity in the first set of tablets that were destroyed, and also in um, in Chassidut, which is a movement that started in the, I want to say, 18th century, that started reintroducing some of these ideas into humanity. Okay. Now, I know that this word Kabbalah makes some people really super uncomfortable. Um, but I can't avoid talking about it because it's where I think the truth is, where I think the truth lies. Okay. And Rabbi Trugman goes on to say it's not unusual that there's not an explicit verse in Tanakh speaking about reincarnation, because a lot of the foundational ideas, like belief in Mashiach and the resurrection of the dead, they're sort of hinted to in obscure ways, but it's not a theology um, that is expressly uh, communicated in the Bible. That's why I keep saying that the Bible is not the whole story. Okay. There's another great Torah commentator, this one from the 13th century, so even longer ago, who we call Nachmanides or the Ramban. You may have heard of Rambam. This is the Ramban. It's a different guy, lived earlier. He says that understanding reincarnation is the key to understanding the true meaning of certain biblical passages. Okay. So this book, Return Again, The Dynamics of Reincarnation, um, it talks about the concepts of reincarnation, but he has a chapter at the end, which is where I really want to focus for the rest of our time, that he calls soul histories. Okay. Uh, um, in other words, who in Tanakh is a reincarnation of another figure in Tanakh or in Jewish tradition. So I picked three examples, and there are many, many more. But before we go into them specifically, I have to give you this sort of deeper idea. In Jewish thought, a soul has five parts. Interestingly enough, all five parts have feminine names. I'm not going to go into it. This is deep, heavy stuff. But the point I want to make is that it's not like a soul goes from one person to another 100% intact. Different parts of the soul can reappear in other people later in life, and an individual person can have parts of other souls. You with me? So it's not like a one-to-one correspondence. Now, by definition, I've just oversimplified a very, very complicated idea, but I so much want you to appreciate and be enriched by how deep Torah is. Okay. So here's the three examples. One of them you're actually a little bit familiar with if you saw the class on King David. So this is about Hagar and this unnamed maidservant. So I'm just going to review because this one I know you're somewhat familiar with. When Sarah, the matriarch Sarah, could not have children, okay, you know this part of the story. She says to her husband Abraham, "You should take my handmaiden Hagar as a wife," and he does that. And Hagar gets pregnant, and she gets pregnant immediately. And as a result of that, she is criticized for mistreating or belittling Sarah. Okay. And um, so, according to Rabbi Trugman, Hagar was reincarnated as the handmaid of Jesse, Yishai, the father of King David, who had separated from his wife. So let's just review this story. So Jesse is married to his wife Netzevet, and they already have a bunch of children. Okay. Remember that Jesse, Yishai, is descended from Ruth, from the marriage of Ruth and Boaz. Okay. And he starts to wonder or worry that that his um, lineage is not pure. Okay, that the rabbis, maybe they made a mistake, and and that his marriage to this righteous Jewish woman named Netzevet is not a kosher marriage. And so as he ages, this fear that his great grandfather Boaz made a mistake um, in marrying Ruth and in saying that that's a kosher lineage, so he separates from his wife. Okay, um, and one of the reasons that he has this doubt is because in the story of Ruth, Boaz dies the night after he marries and he's intimate with Ruth. Okay. So he's thinking maybe that's like for um, God's punishment for this illicit marriage that shouldn't have happened. Okay. Now, Yishai and Netzevet already have a bunch of children when this thought occurs to him. And so he separates from her for a period of, I believe it's 3 years. And after 3 years, he wants to have more children. And so he decides to try to have more children with one of the Canaanite maidservants from his household by taking her as a wife. We do not know her name. And I've told you this story, but in this context, he wants to have a child with her. So he goes to her and he says, I'm going to free you, I'm going to marry you, and from you I will have more children. And the maidservant, who is loyal to Nitzevet, to the mistress of the house, is aware of the mistress's pain of being separated from her husband for so many years, and also of her own desire to have more children. And so this is where the rabbis get the idea, or where what they base it on, that this maidservant is a reincarnation of Hagar, because the situation is parallel. She's a maidservant in the house of a married couple who are important people in the Jewish community. Well, Abraham and Sarah, it's not Jewish yet, but whatever, they are an important couple, and they are um, the maidservant is brought in order to have children, right? To carry on this household. What happens in Hagar's case is she says, "Yeah, sure, I'll marry you, I'll sleep with you, Abraham," and she has a child, and then she belittles Sarah. It doesn't look, it's not a good look for her. But the empathetic maidservant, the Canaanite maidservant in the time of King David, you know this part of the story because I told you, but I'll repeat it again, that she goes to Nitzevet. She doesn't sleep with Yishai. She goes to Nitzevet and she gives over this idea, a plan. And her plan basically is that the night that she's supposed to be with Yishai, she's going to slip out, and Nitzevet, it's dark, right? There's no electric lights in that time. And in fact, Nitzevet, that night, she is reunited with her husband, although he thinks he's with the maidservant, and she conceives the child that would be King David. Okay. In this way, Hagar, the soul of Hagar, receives her tikkun, her soul correction, because faced with the same situation, basically the offer to sleep with someone else's husband, as this unnamed Shivcha, she makes the correct choice. Okay. Do you see how that goes together? Yes. Okay. All right. So that's one. So Hagar gets reincarnated in this unnamed maidservant. She corrects the mistake that she made in a previous lifetime, and removes that blemish from her soul. Now, let's talk about Devorah, the judge and the prophetess from the book of Judges. Okay. There are two different souls, the rabbis say, that reincarnated into Devorah, two different women's souls. The first was Tamar. Okay. Now, yet, in order to review the story of Tamar, we have to go all the way back to Bereshit, Genesis chapter 38, that one of the 12 sons of Yaakov, of Jacob, is Yehuda, Judah. Okay. And he marries a woman named Bathshua, and he has three sons with her, Onan, and Shelah. Okay. And Tamar marries Okay. But dies, and he before they have children. So there is a rule in biblical times. I don't know that it's enforced today, but if a man dies without bearing children, his brother is obligated to marry his widow. That's called a levirate marriage. There's ways out of it. But in any case, the second brother, whose name is Onan, marries Tamar in this levirate marriage, but he refuses to consummate the marriage. So this is what the rabbis say, is that whenever he was intimate with Tamar, it's a little graphic, but he withdrew before he ejaculated in her. The rabbis say that it's because she was very beautiful, and he didn't want to mar her physical beauty with the changes that happen in a woman's body when she has a pregnancy and a child. So he spilled his seed on the ground. Okay. And if you look up the word in English, onanism, Onanism, it means either masturbation or this concept of withdrawing before ejaculation. Okay, so it took its name from this biblical story. So here we have Tamar, who, by the way, has a prophetic vision that she, through a union with the family of Yehuda, she is supposed to be the ancestor of kings. Okay. Now she's married two of the brothers, the sons of Yehuda, and there's no children yet. Okay. So she decides to take matters into her own hands, because the third son is Shelah, was much younger. And she does not want to wait. So what does she do? You probably know this part of the story. It's in the book of Genesis, chapter 38. She dresses up like a prostitute and sits at the crossroads and attracts Yehuda's attention and tricks him into sleeping with her. And she does conceive, and she conceives twins whose names are Peretz and Zerach. And Peretz is a direct ancestor of King David, 10 generations behind. Okay. Now, what does this have to do with Devorah? Remember that I told you that Devorah has the souls of two women. One of them is Tamar. What's the connection? Okay. What is Devorah famous for? If you look in the book of Judges, in the book of Shoftim, chapter 4, verse 5, she sat under the palm tree of Devorah. Okay. And the children of Israel came to her for judgment. The Hebrew word for palm tree, which is also a man's name in Hebrew, is Tomer, which is an alternate form of Tamar. Okay, so it's according to the Arizal, the one of the famous Kabbalistic rabbis. This is an allusion to Tamar being reincarnated as Devorah, her sitting under the palm tree in the open and judging people who come to consult with her openly, publicly, is a rectification for Tamar sitting at the crossroads dressed as a prostitute. Okay. You see how that was, even though she was Tamar, I'm speaking of, Tamar was operating under the idea, the sense that she got from a minor kind of prophecy that we call Ruach HaKodesh, that she's supposed to have children with this family. In fact, she does, and that it does lead to the lineage of King David, but she did it in sort of a like not so kosher way. So now Devorah is rectifying that blemish that's on her soul. Okay. This that's the first soul. What's the second soul that reincarnated into Devorah? It was Tzipporah. Who was Tzipporah? Tzipporah was the wife of Moses. Now, what's the connection? If we go back to the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus, chapter 4, verse 20, Moses is now charged with going back into Egypt to participate in the Exodus. And he takes Zipporah, who is very pregnant, has one child and is very pregnant with another child, and he takes her on the way back from Midian to Egypt. Okay. And it says in the book of Exodus, chapter 4, verse 20, so Moses took his wife and his sons, mounted them upon a donkey, and he returned to the land of Egypt, and Moses took the staff of God in his hand. Okay, now there's a very bizarre story in this retelling, that while they're on the road, that Zipporah circumcises their second son and also saves Moses' life. I do actually have a whole class on women in the life of Moses, which I might offer another time. But here, this act, which takes a lot of courage and strength and initiative, according to our rabbis, was rewarded by her being reincarnated into Devorah, who is also an unusually strong-willed woman. Now, along the way, they get to Egypt, and Moses meets his brother Aaron. Okay, and Aaron says to him, "What in the world are you doing, bringing your wife and your children? Like, we already have so many Israelites who are suffering. Why are you bringing them basically into this mess?" And so, um, in Shemot, in Exodus chapter 18, verse 2, um, the Moses's father-in-law, who is called in English Jethro, but we call him Yitro, he takes Zipporah, the wife of Moses, and the two children, he takes them back. Okay. So basically, she misses all of the whole light show. You know, she misses all of the plagues. She misses the Exodus. She misses all the miracles, including the splitting of the sea, after which the newly freed Israelites sing what we call in Hebrew Shirat Hayam, the song of the sea. And that was very painful for her, Because even though Moses sent her away to protect her, like she missed all of the amazing miracles. And so she's reincarnated as Devorah because there are 10 biblical songs. Apparently, we only know 9 of them. And the 10th one will be sung or introduced to the world at the time of Mashiach. But one of them is what we call Shirat Devorah, the Song of Devorah, which is in the book of Judges, chapter 5, verses 2 through 31. So after defeating the army of the enemy, who is Sisera, okay, Devorah sings this um, song called Shirat Devorah. It's not exactly Shirat Hayam. It's not the song of the sea. It's a song of Devorah, but in her incarnation as Devorah, Tzipporah can benefit from that. Okay. I have one, let me just check the time. Okay, I have one more story or one more connection that I want to make with you. And these are two stories that are often, they're very, very similar and they're often conflated. So it's the story of Yael and Yehudit, who you may know as Judith. Okay. So Yael, who you may, I don't know how to say it. Jael. I don't know how you were taught to say it. Jael. Okay. But I'm going to call her Yael because that's how I know her. Yael lived in the time of Devorah. Okay. She's not Jewish. In the book of Judges, she is the wife of a tribe, a member of a tribe that's sympathetic to the Israelites. Okay. And her story is that she coaxes Sisera, who is the enemy who is trying to destroy the Israelites, into her tent, where, according to Jewish tradition, she gave him milk to drink until he and salty cheese or something, whatever, until he salty cheese. See, I'm confused the two stories. She gave him warm milk to drink. Here's a part of the story that isn't in the text, but that the rabbis add on the level of drush, on the level of midrash, is that she had sex with him, not once, not twice, 7 times until he finally fell asleep. And when he was sleeping, she took a peg and drove it through his skull and killed him. Okay. This is in Shoftim, in the book of Judges, chapter 4, verse 21. As Yael, the wife of Heber, took the 10 pin and placed the hammer in her hand, she came to him, meaning Sisera, stealthily, and thrust the pin into his temple, and it pierced through into the ground, and he was in a deep sleep and weary, and he died. Okay. So she killed him, but in order to get to him, to get him asleep, she has to like wear him out. So it wasn't just a cup of warm milk. Okay. There's more to the story. Now, the truth is that Yael is judged favorably for having killed this enemy, Sisera, but because she slept with him, she was a married woman, there's this defect in her soul. And so the rabbis say that she was reincarnated as Yehudit. Okay, so the story of Judith is a Hanukkah related to Hanukkah. It actually does not appear in Tanakh. It's part of Jewish tradition. But Yehudit is the one who kills the Greek general Holofernes. And how she does that is that she slowly gains his trust. And she eventually is alone with him and she feeds him salty goat cheese and what undiluted wine, which I guess is very, very strong stuff. And he falls asleep into a dead stupor. And she cuts off his head with his own sword. I'm sorry, it's so graphic. Puts the sword in a basket and escapes from the enemy's camp. Okay. So the small flaw or defect on the soul of Yael because she slept with Sisera was rectified by Yehudit, who did the same thing. She killed an enemy general, but she didn't sleep with him to do it. Okay. So those are three of the stories um, of reincarnation according to uh, according to how we understand the principle that the soul comes back again and again and again until all of the parts of the soul are perfected so that the soul can be together in its eternal place. Now, I I want to, that is what I prepared. I see that there's a couple of, oh, okay. That was a nothing. Okay. So yes, Natalie, you want to ask something?
Yeah, I have a question because when I mean when I see that people die, I mean I how to say when people die and they are back with the family, like the people who died before, how can this work with the reincarnation? This is a thing that I don't understand how it works.
Let me see if I understand the question. How can a person who passes away, like a person like us, who passes away, how can they be reunited with the people that they were, that they loved in their life? Is that your question?
If there is reincarnation, how does that work?
Okay. So a partial answer is that people tend to get reincarnated with people that they have continuing relationships with. So, for example, right now, I have two daughters. In this lifetime, they are my daughters. The principle is this is not the first time our souls are sharing a lifetime. It may be that in a previous life, they were my mother, or they were my son, or they were my somebody else important to me. Okay. So you we have all lived long enough to have the experience of meeting someone with whom we had an instant kind of chemistry of one kind or another. Either we just we just feel really comfortable with somebody that we just met, right? You know what I'm talking about? Or we meet somebody, they have not done a single thing wrong, and there's just something about them that makes us very uncomfortable. Okay. And it's not based on, it's like an emotion that's not based on anything that actually happened in that lifetime. What it's based on, according to this understanding, is your soul recognizes the soul of that person, and you have been together before. Maybe if you had a dispute with somebody that was left unreconciled in a previous life, and that's why it makes you uncomfortable to be in their presence. Or maybe you love this person in a previous lifetime, and that's why you feel so comfortable with them now. That's a partial answer. Okay. Margaret, you have something you want to ask? I can't hear you. Are you unmuted? You need to unmute yourself. Margaret, you need to unmute yourself so that I can hear
Okay.
you. Ah, there we
Okay,
go.
can you hear me? Okay.
Now I can.
My question is, does the person know that the parts of their soul that needs refining before, because you mentioned there were five parts and you didn't go into the five parts. So and then I heard your statement that it usually happens with people you're familiar with. Does the soul know that it's being rectified, or is there any study on that, or
Great question.
how does that work?
Okay. When we are not in a body, when we are in between lifetimes, our souls know a lot of stuff. Okay. And sometimes even agree. For example, I don't want to say this across the board, and I don't want to say this in any way that's not respectful. God forbid. But it is possible that the soldiers that are dying in this war, that their souls agreed to come back into this world, to die in a war defending the Jewish people in the land of Israel as part of their spiritual um, rectification, because those souls are unbelievably rewarded. This is what we believe when they leave this lifetime. If you die defending the Jewish people in the land of Israel, like especially as a soldier, you go on an express train up. Now, in this lifetime, a lot of that information is hidden from us. There are people who, reliable people, usually rabbis, usually people who are very steeped in this study, who can tell people, like they can sit in your presence and tell you something about perhaps your most previous life in this world, which is fascinating. But generally speaking, we do not come into the world with this information because we have to. we have to figure it out, and we have to live the best, most holy, most correct, godly lives that we can to try to fix whatever we messed up or got wrong or didn't finish in a previous lifetime. However, one of the clues is a good way of saying it. One of the clues is if there's something that recurs in your lifetime, if God gave you certain gifts, certain skills, certain attraction to something, chances are you needed that in order to fix whatever you need to fix. It could also be a problem that recurs through your whole life. So I have a friend who is a very holy and spiritual woman, and she constantly has trouble with money. Okay. They'll get a job, lose a job. They have enough money, they don't have enough money. Just like it's like a stone they keep tripping over in this lifetime. And that's usually an indication of the fact that there's something to fix there, because God keeps presenting you with opportunities, puts you in a situation, either in a relationship with a person you need to clean something, your soul needs to clean something up with, or in a situation where a problem is going to occur and you have to make a better decision in this lifetime than you did in a previous lifetime, like the example of Hagar and the Shifcha. Okay, Deb is asking, what about recurring traumas in my life, my daughter and my granddaughter's lives? Okay, without knowing a lot more detail about that, I don't know that I can answer that question, but I can say in general that when we see patterns, it is reasonable, patterns recurring in our lives, it is reasonable to assume that God is trying to get us to giving us an opportunity to fix something, or we came into this lifetime to fix something in our souls. I'm not an expert on this. I can't tell you who you were in a previous life or what your particular circumstances might be. I just my idea in teaching this kind of controversial content, because to be honest, there are Jews today, there are Orthodox Jews today who will say that reincarnation is hogwash, that they don't believe in it. It's not a thing. Okay. I obviously feel differently, and lots of other people feel differently. And there is a whole tradition, but it is something that is rejected by some people because just going all the way back to the beginning of our discussion today, the entirety of Torah has not been revealed. And some people feel like if it doesn't say it in either in the Tanakh or in the Talmud, they don't buy it. Okay. I find, and I'm speaking about my own spiritual journey, is that teachings like this really make the Torah come alive for me, really make God's huge plan for humanity very, very exciting. And it also takes me out of like the relatively minor problems and annoyances of my life, um even the um emotional ups and downs that we're living with right now. When I put it in this larger context and I understand that God's plan for the world and God's plan for humanity is so much bigger than whether or not I have to pay thousands of dollars for hot water, I find it very comforting. I hope that some of you do as well. Brittany asks, for example, King David has to come back to make a tikkun. Does that mean God didn't forgive David when he repented? I am not qualified. It's a great question. I'm not qualified to answer this question, but I will say that the that Moses and King David, going back to Adam and Moses and King David and the Messiah, all share aspects of the same soul. And if you think about it, their missions are very similar. Their missions are missions of redemption. And so I wish I could answer the question more specifically. And Deb, I wish I could answer your question more specifically. I'm just pointing out the little the extent to which I understand these very, very deep ideas, because I just love. I'm going to tell you, we're out of time, but I just want to leave you with this one story. When I was first becoming interested in spiritual things, when I, you know that I was born Jewish. I grew up in a very not particularly Jewish home, and nobody ever talked about God or Torah or any of that stuff. And I started getting into, did I ever tell you this story? I started getting into reincarnation from like a new agey kind of perspective. And I read a whole bunch of books and I went to a whole bunch of events that were not Jewish at all. And I was like really getting into it. And then in my community, then we lived in Baltimore at the time, in Baltimore, Maryland, and there was something called the Adult Institute that met for like four weeks, and there were maybe 15 or 20 different sessions, and you could just sign up for one, and you go to the same, everybody goes to the same synagogue, and everybody's got a different classroom, whatever, and whatever your topic is, you learn for 4 weeks. And it was a topic called the Jewish view of reincarnation. And I said to myself, I didn't know there was a Jewish view of reincarnation because I didn't know anything really about Torah. And I was so excited to see that these two parts of my life were coming together. And here it is. This is probably 40 years later that I am still fascinated by what it means that our souls have lived before, that we came into this world um, not as a clean slate, but we came with a whole soul history. And what we're accomplishing in this world is rectification in order to prepare us to be in the purest, most complete state to be side by side with God in the next world, however you understand that. So I know this was heavy. Well, I mean, it wasn't heavy like anti-Semitism. I know that this was it's intense, and I know that for some of you it's uncomfortable because it flies in the face of what Christianity teaches, which I'm not a big expert, but from what I understand, is completely different than this. And I just wanted to I wanted to give you this little piece, this little introduction of this deeper understanding and the of this dynamics of reincarnation. Anybody have anything to say that's really burning um, before we go? Yes.
Yes, actually, I have a Jewish friend I've met when I came back from Israel. I actually was in Israel on October 7th, but I met um, a lady here and she's Jewish and she is actually in Kabbalah, so I'm not unfamiliar. So she's teaching us Hebrew and goes a little bit in Kabbalah and it's very deep. And of course, it's a whole nother level for us anyways, but she teaches us some. And um, but we do have to be careful who teaches it, I believe.
For sure.
And I believe someone has to know the Torah, right? Or is at least immersed and practice Torah before, there's so much out there. We have to be careful, I guess.
That is, yes,
She's
it's
in Torah. She does so hard, so she is, but there is
right.
some
It's for sure true because
Kabbalah.
there's something I don't, what country are you in?
I'm living in Tennessee in the US.
You're in the US and Tennessee. Okay, so in the US, there's something called the Kabbalah Center. Okay. It is like popularizing Kabbalah. There's also books that are popularizing Kabbalah. You may have heard the idea. I'm glad you said that actually, because um, there's a lot of distortion. And um, I'm I want to warn you exactly what Martina said, like warn you away from getting this from anything but an like an authentic Jewish source because it can mess with your brain and there's a lot of distortions in the transmission and sometimes it gets mixed in with darker stuff. So even though I touched on this idea of Kabbalah and mysticism and so forth, and that is the part that really animates my soul. Even I only study it in relatively small doses, filtered through my teachers. And in fact, that you may have heard this idea that there's a tradition that you're not supposed to study Kabbalah until you're 40 years old and married, and you're supposed to be a man. And the assumption is by then you will have had time to learn like the foundations and not just have like the first thing you learn about Torah or about Judaism be some, Kabbalah class taught in the Kabbalah Center. I know, I don't know, there's one in New York. I think there's a bunch of them around the country. That's totally bogus stuff. What I'm trying to teach you is as authentic as I can. So yes, thank you for that warning. Okay, it's 6 minutes after the hour. I'm going to let you go. Thank you very much. I wasn't sure if today, because so many people are either in Tennessee, in Nashville, or whatever, that I was going to have anybody to talk to. So I appreciate you all joining me, and have a good week. Bye now.
Thank you so much, Rivka. Thank you.
My
Thank you,
pleasure.
Rivka.
Bye.